Guys have questions? Yeah. Sorry, I just got a memo that you're recording. Uh, yeah, you can ask questions throughout. At the end of it, well, obviously I can do a Q&A. You guys, when I do the PowerPoint presentation, I'm gonna give me a minute because I gotta figure out how to screen share and do all of that fun stuff. I'm pretty sure I got that down, but we'll see. And questions you can throw into the comments, the chats. If I don't get to them right away, it's probably because I'm staring at my PowerPoint trying to figure out my next move. Uh, I'm based out of Phoenix, Arizona. Actually in Huntington Beach right now. So I will be doing it with you guys remotely here on a vacation. Let's see if I get this started. Start share. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. All right, hold on. Apparently I gotta open up my privacy settings and allow Zoom access to all this stuff. Okay.
Oh, good.
There we go. Does that work? Everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So obviously we're here to talk about diving underneath the pyramids here in Sudan. The opening picture that you see is actually taken from the top of one of the other pyramids on site there. So the site itself will kind of dig into exactly where it is and how many pyramids and kind of how it all came to be. What is exactly we do? What kind of stuff we find? Obviously, I've got some snippets that we took from our partners at NatGeo who did a pretty fantastic job at doing some 3D rendering and stuff for us. All right, let me see here. All right. I think I went too far. Okay. So obviously, right here, this is the second year that I was there. So the first year we had a much more limited team. It was myself and one other diver. Uh, the main person that you'll see who talks quite a bit on TV and stuff is Dr. Pierce Paul. He was my second diver. The third year or the second year, I was able to bring a third diver. Third year, I brought a fourth diver. So we're going to talk more about the most recent kind of stuff. But this is about the average size of team that we have actually out there working. We have anywhere from 20 to 50 local Sudanese to help us excavate, like move out sand, move rock, do that kind of stuff. We have obviously a few government officials to make sure that everything is up to par for them. We have a massive amount of archaeologists and scientists, obviously, that oversee and anything that we find of importance, obviously, we have to preserve it and collect it in a safe manner so it can be preserved. So that's kind of what a lot of them are out there doing for us. And then, of course, the divers. So here is the dive team of, of this year, right? We got back in February, end of February, about 3 weeks before the coup that is still currently waging right now, the big war that is happening. We'll talk about that a little bit. David Dunn there is the big guy on the left. I am kind of more towards in the middle there. Dr. Pierce Paul with his hat. He loves to wear that hat all the time. If you ever see him on TV, he's probably wearing that hat. He's wearing it with his wetsuit. It's ridiculous, but he always does that. And then Fred Fiddler, who is on the far right there. Everybody there except for Dr. Pierce Paul is an active instructor of some kind for diving, either tech or still doing some recreational kind of stuff too. Uh, Dave actually is started as one of my dive masters for a long time. He's done the pyramids with me twice out of the 3 times. Brett has been doing it once. So where are they, right? So here's kind of a little bit more of an intricate map than we'll kind of dig more deep. But so this is obviously showing you'll be familiar with, obviously, the Red Sea. You can see that we are just below that Egyptian border. So we're pretty north of Sudan. And if you don't know, Sudan is a massive country, right? It was the largest country in Africa up until the new creation of South Sudan versus North Sudan. Uh, so it is quite a massive amount of space and travel time to fly in. You go to the capital of Khartoum, and it's about a 7 hour drive from the capital up to where we actually will be doing this, which is part of our issues that we have with, a lot of gear and trying to really dive it the way I want to dive it is almost solely impossible due to like the location and power and getting fuel and all that kind of stuff. Just to get tanks is a nightmare. Uh, that's probably one of the biggest things I get asked is, how do we dive it? And I've got some equipment stuff I'll be going over with you guys. But this kind of shows a little bit of where Khartoum is, kind of towards the south. You can see that it runs up the Nile. We will be right by it. The next slide will kind of zoom in a little bit more. Zoomed in a lot more, I guess. So that's actually what the pyramids look like, right? They're a little bit more weathered than the ones that you typically see in Egypt and that kind of stuff. But they are a lot more prevalent here in Sudan than there are in Egypt, right? Egypt's got a few, but they're all massive and everybody knows about them. Down here in Sudan, they've got more pyramids than any other country or any other place on earth, pretty much combined. Is it just on our site alone? There's around 70 just on our site, and there's 4 or 5 more sites similar to that around that area. So they were discovered and excavated by the guy who just popped up on the screen. His name was George Reisner, and he was the first guy to excavate these tombs back in like the 1912s, 1915 time. And he was the first one to actually open up the door to Nastasin's tomb, which is the tomb in which we actually dive. But he did not go into the burial chamber because he found that it was flooded, right? They dug in, kept getting deeper, the water kept filling up more and more. They got to the doorway and realized it was pretty much flooded, not all the way through, but almost all the way to the back. Currently, it's completely flooded. And so here is actually from Google Maps, right? If you Google Map Nuri, you can zoom in on it and actually see the pyramids from the sky as you do here. There's not a whole lot left in terms of the 70 or so that are on site. Most have been withered away. Also, a lot of the stone has been reused, you could say, by the local population over the last couple thousand years. They've kind of taken a lot of the brick to make some of their own housing and some of their walls and things like that, which you will see it's more or less a very distinct village, right? It's not so much a city that we operate in. It's pretty remote, not a lot of running water, not a lot of hot, well, there is no hot water. Electricity is hit or miss on most days, which makes the diving aspect a little bit more difficult. And we will go through some of that with the gear. But this is a good basic overview of the kind of area that we have. You can see right there, it's all desert. Kind of towards the north part of it, it's looking to be more grass, right? That's getting close to the Nile. So we're about 1.5 miles or so from the actual Nile. And so we're getting the groundwater is what's actually flooding that tomb. It's not the Nile or anything like that. It's actual groundwater because of damming of the Nile. So that's even a more zoomed in picture. And this one's pointing out a little bit more information, right? We have Taharka's pyramid from 690 to 664 BC. He's probably the most famous person buried at Nuri. He's mentioned in the Old Testament. He's done quite a bit of work. He's even been found to have his name inscribed on stuff in Egypt. He actually conquered Egypt and ruled Egypt for a while. Now we can see Nastasin's pyramid. He's the last person to be buried there. And that is the guy who we actually have been excavating. So for you guys who've actually watched the latest Expedition Unknown, you'll know that we did find an actual piece of him. So we did find a toe cap And so we did send it off for DNA testing and all that kind of stuff, and we'll see what that holds for us in the next year. We've kind of mapped out his area with the staircase, which you'll see we dig out. And then there's 3 distinct chambers, which we'll go over. So here's actually what it looks like when we're there working. So we set up a dive tent that basically holds all of our equipment. For the first year, we actually had to manually drag all of our equipment in and out every day. And it's about a 1/4 mile walk from where we can park to where we actually have to be. And it's trucking big, heavy stuff through the sand twice a day. It's not fun. So we actually ended up building this tent while we're there. And we leave all of our stuff there, and we pay a local Sudanese military to actually camp out there and just watch our stuff for us. And to the left of it, you can see we built a little kind of wall kind of around the front part of the entrance. That's to prevent sand or rock blowing back down into where the doorway is. Also, it blocks the locals from walking through there at night because they tend to walk goats or sheep or something like that, and they could just blatantly fall into that, and it puts a damper on your dive day if you got to go dig somebody out of there. And you can see kind of the sheer size of it. It kind of looks like a smaller pyramid. It's not the biggest, most impressive one on site, but it's still pretty cool. I got some hieroglyphs and stuff you guys will be able to see here in a little bit. So here is the front part of that actual pyramid. And on the left, you can see that was kind of an altar place where they would leave offerings and stuff. And there's all the carvings and stuff to the right. Sorry. All right. A little bit more of a zoom in there for you. So it's very, very similar to it's just Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now I cannot read that. I've tried. I bought a book, tried to do that, but it is far too hard for me to learn. My Spanish is not great, so hieroglyphs is even worse. All right. So here is kind of what we're looking at, right, in terms of what it used to be in the 1910s to what it was in February. So the water level has dramatically increased because that doorway that you see on the left is about, say, 10 to 12 feet below the surface that you see here with that's Big Dave standing up over, and we call it his little perch. It's where he hangs out and he makes sure our lines don't get tangled, the communication lines are working. That's where the comm box is, everything like that. We'll go over our gear setup and that kind of stuff here in a minute. So here is kind of what we sketched out, what we thought it was supposed to look like when we first went into it. Obviously, the water level is considerably higher than that. And so we made a sweet tweak of this and we created this one. So this is kind of showing a little bit more of what it looks like. Now, this is pretty rudimentary. The NatGeo stuff I have in a little bit is far better than any of this. So it's just kind of showing you that we walk down the staircase, you enter the water, we have to swim down to the bottom, enter through, we call it the chute. It's basically like a 2-foot by 2-foot steel box that we had created the first year to prevent the doorway from caving in on me. So it's literally a steel box with steel on almost like a ladder on the top, right? So you can kind of like feel your way through. And it's about, say, 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, 4 feet long. And that goes from the entrance into the first chamber, which is shaped more or less like a hallway, not so much rounded like that depiction in this map. Second chamber is definitely the only spot where you can actually get your head out of the water. And you'll see in the National Geographic and in some of the Discovery Channel ones, They will take their regulators out and they will talk to each other. They know they're not supposed to do that, but they do it anyway. We have tested the air for oxygen content, but I don't know what other contaminants and CO2. I don't know what buildup and stuff, but it is 20-ish%, not 21, but close. So it's about 20. So it's still breathable, but we advise not to breathe the air inside of it for obvious reasons. But they love to do that, and it drives me nuts because it makes me look bad on TV. But I told them not to. But half the time they don't want me in there for the camera shots, so I can't control everything they do. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pyramid and the niche and all that kind of stuff in the third chamber. I got some pretty good footage of that kind of stuff too, so you guys will see what it looks like without us digging, and then you'll see what it looks like when we have to start digging. When we start digging, zero visibility, don't even bother turning the light on, you won't see anything. Okay, so here is, hopefully this will play. This is a video of Dave going in, and this is gonna be fairly early on in the season, so we're going to have a little bit better visibility than we typically would. You'll be able to see that because one, you'll be able to see a little bit of the walls. You'll see further in. He's entering a doorway right now. It's hitting the ceiling. You can see kind of sediment falling off. And it's definitely got some weird thermoclines built into there. So it looks like dirty water right there, but that's actually like probably 85-degree, thicker feeling water. It's almost like a silty water. And then the top part ranges anywhere from 70s, 65 or so on the outside, all the way to about 80 or so in the third chamber. That's him dragging in one of our hookah lines that we're running at that point. It's about 150-foot hookah line is what we utilize for that kind of stuff. So he's entering what looks, this is my guess, chamber 2. Yeah, so he's coming into chamber 2. And you can see chamber 3, the doorway to that towards the back. And then he'd swim down through that little doorway again to get to inside chamber 3. Let's see. I don't know if we'll actually, does he go in chamber 3? I don't remember. But you can definitely see the thermocline and that water versus the clearer water. It's night and day, the warmth. Okay, but he's going all the way in there. And you can see just barely at the very end of that, he keeps breathing out of the way. There's kind of looks like a window carved right there at the end. That is, we call it the niche, and it's an actual place that they used to put all like the offerings and stuff like that for the pharaoh. You inside that muck is an actual carved sarcophagus that's actually right in the middle of that room. You can't see it in this. I might be able to dig up some pictures of that in a minute. All right. The visibility within, right? So here's kind of the 4 stages that we have. We have inside the tomb on the first day, which is absolutely, that's on the far right, right? That's the clearest, most beautiful you're gonna see it. It's a traditional cave dive or a cenote or something like that. If you ever dive that, where it's usually really, really clear, not much disturbance from the outside world. And then we start digging because now we're actually having to dig for artifacts and bring out stuff. And so it just changes. And we get outside the tomb is more brown, gross kind of water there at the top left. That guy right there, make him a little bit bigger for you. Make that inside tomb a little bigger too. All right, and then inside the second chamber, it gets a little bit more color to the outside, right? It's not as brown. And then inside the third chamber, it gets almost like a whitish blue hint. And that's really the only way you can identify where you're at if you're not on the cave line, if you're not doing something like that, you don't know where you're at. You can turn your light on, and judging by what color you see in front of you is basically how we know roughly where we're going to be at. Outside is the gross, colder water. Chamber 2 is a little warmer, a little greener, and then chamber 3 is just kind of a whiteout. Here's a map that we drew after the first couple days going in back in like 2019, and this was kind of after we started digging like what we found, right? So we have all these different called shopties. They're little tiny mini statues of the pharaoh. I got a bunch of pictures of that for you guys here in a minute, but you can see that's what those little small little circles are kind of lined against, look like the bottom part right there. They would have surrounded that entire chamber with those, and those guys are what more or less is going to be helpers in the afterlife, right? So once the pharaoh's dead, those supposedly are going to come alive and help him with whatever he needs in the afterlife. And there's a bunch of other stuff in there. We found a bronze statue, which you'll see a picture of, which is kind of cool because the only other one that's ever been found is currently in the Louvre in France. So I have a picture of that. You guys can see the two. We found some leather. We found some bone, pottery, that kind of stuff. There is basically in the middle of that big slab, we were able to get our hands kind of under it, and we tried to scoop some out, and that's where we found the toe from last year. So I mean, we know he's in there. We know there's a body in there. We're just it's pretty thick clay silt that you're digging through. It has like 3 different layers, and so it's real hard to just dig out. And you'll see kind of the method that we use. I'll go through that with the equipment here pretty quick. So mapping out the tomb, when we dig out, we're very specific to know where we're digging from. So we kind of make a big square box, right? That's showing like chamber 3, and we'll go take a specific bucket and we'll dig out that bucket, and then we write down what that bucket is and which number it is, right? Like we have A to D, but we might get A 5 times, so it's A 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we B 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So that's kind of how we map it. That's kind of more of the boring part of this, I know. Let's get to some more of the fun stuff. All right. Everybody seeing this part?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that's a little bit more of a 3D rendering of exactly what we were kind of going through. And I think the next one will have, wait, wait. Why is it playing the same one? Play the next one. There we go. So this is basically what it looks like the first day. All right, that was a little excerpt taken from the NatGeo special from 2019, which I think that came out within 2021, took like 2 years. Why does it play it twice? Stop it. All right, so here is actually part of those leather fragments that we did find that he talked about. So we pulled those out. So us measuring, this is on the floor of our house in Sudan when we're measuring stuff. Everything we preserve, we actually put back into contents. You'll see a bag of, looks like gross water down at the bottom. That is actually where we put the fragments back to, so they kind of stay in the natural environment that they have been submerged in for the last couple thousand years. We don't want to change that composition of that water too much because that can help preserve it, leave it where it's been. I mean, it's already as damaged as it's going to get. All right, so here's a couple of those shopties, like those little actual statues that we were talking about. So that'll give you a good idea of kind of what they look like. Some of them we get out whole, some we get out in pieces, some are beautifully painted still, some crumble in your hand when you touch them. I mean, you pick them up and they'll just fall apart. So here's a decent sized collection that we could get out in a couple days. So that's obviously a few. We probably have, say, 4 times that amount right now. And here is that bronze statue that we talked about. It's of a falcon god, Hymen, from Egypt kind of times. So typically they would have this, and that's just both sides of it. I don't have 2 of them, it's just left and right. And they would have a pharaoh depicted typically in front of that, which you'll see in this guy right here. Okay, so that's the one that's in the Louvre. So that's what we assume the other half of this is going to look like. We have yet to find that little statue of the pharaoh actually on the right. We don't have that part of it yet. Just the falcon type of thing on the left. But that's the only other known one to ever be found out of a tomb so far, is the one that's in the Louvre. And that was taken from Taharka, who's that more famous pharaoh, the big one. Reisner took it out in about 1912. Most of his stuff is either in the Louvre, but a massive collection of it is at Boston University. I believe it's Boston University that has it. There we go. All right. So let's talk about the actual diving aspect of all of this, right? So we have the top picture is the whole site. Middle pictures our dive area with our dive tent right straight ahead. A couple guys setting up the gear that you can see. The bottom picture is actually inside of our dive tent with all our pelican cases and stall sack bags and air or whatever else we might have. We now have moved in actual couple cots, so we have stuff to sit down on and snacks and stuff like that. Usually it'll be filled with cases of Red Bull and Snickers bars. Is typically what we live off of inside of there on the work day. We actually have to typically get Red Bull from either the embassy or from Egypt because they don't sell it in Sudan. All right. So here is a picture a little bit. Once again, let's talk about our gear. So gear that we're actually using, because as divers, that's more or less what we all can relate to, right? We all want to know what each other's using. So we're running 5 mil wetsuits is typically what we were trying to use. We did bring like an exowear or a shark skin or a lava core or something like that to wear underneath all of our wetsuits in case we needed to. In case the water got colder. First year I went in, the water was insanely warm. Second year we went in, it was much colder because the water level kept growing higher and higher, mixing with warmer water and colder water. So this year we brought 5 mils and an actual like a 2 mil warmth to put underneath it if we needed to. We do run cave helmets. We do have a few from Light Monkey as well, but we typically don't use those. We like to run the Aqualung bump helmet, which I don't believe they make anymore, which is disappointing. Same with the Paralons, Vaquita wide. We got all new Vaquitas for this. And as I think a lot of you guys know, Paralons went under bankruptcy about 3 weeks after, but which was great. It was, I shouldn't say it was great. It's not, but it was fine. We love them. We use them. It's a shame that happened. But the camera is great. Like for what we use as a helmet cam, and it's great for us. We run a couple of cave adventure dive lights. We have other ones as well, but those are typically what we have mounted to our helmets. That's what you'll see in the picture. We've teamed up with Dive Right for quite a few stuff, and so they helped us out with getting XT4 regulators. And since we're not utilizing them with first stages like we want to, but with a hookah system as well, they were able to kind of customize that for us, and we put some different type of springs in, so we'd be able to breathe at a partial pressure of much lower. And we use battery and gas powered air hookah systems. Hopefully, I think that's kind of the last year we're going to have to do that. We've actually finally got enough stuff, and hopefully, we should get enough scuba tanks to be able to run either doubles or back mount type of a thing for it. And the reason why we had to choose the airline hookah systems was one, we needed something reliable out in the middle of nowhere. So we had to find something that could run off of either, typically, we wanted something that didn't take power or much fuel, because getting diesel isn't that hard, but getting unleaded or benzene is really hard. So that limited our gas powered stuff. And then electricity, yeah, power shut off all the time, just intermediately. So we couldn't get any sort of compressor to run or fill tanks. We did get the Sudanese Navy to help us, and they filled a tank, but it took about 4 days for them to do it. And they could only get it to like 2000 PSI or like 120 bar. So we wasn't feasible, right? We could not run as many dives per day as we wanted to when it took 4 days to get one tank. But now this coming time, I think we'll be able to change that a little bit. But so that's what we're using now. We do have 3 cubic foot, those little tiny spare airs, which I'm sure everybody has an opinion on. So we all run those as bailouts on your person, and then we have 6 cubic foot actual bailout bottles, like stage bottles along a cave line. So there are multiple contingencies for this type of dive. We run each time there's probably 3 6 cubic foot stage bottles, and each diver would have 3 cubic feet of air on them. And maximum amount of divers we would allow at one time is 4. Typically, we stick to about 3, and that way one would be at chamber 1, chamber 2, and chamber 3. And we do kind of a daisy chain of buckets to kind of get that. So somebody excavates chamber 1, you're digging around, and you will cut your hands like you will not believe digging in this silt. If your hands get so dried out from this clay, and then you're just sharp rocks and whatever, you dig it all into this little, we call it a jerry can, but it's not. It's a vegetable oil bucket that we've cut handles into. Once again, resources are pretty limited, so we're utilizing these. We pass each one up. Next person gives you the empty one, and you just kind of daisy chain it out. If you watch the newest Expedition Unknown series, you'll see that we were able to get the U.S. ambassador, John Godfrey, to actually come down. We met him up prior to in Khartoum, and we were able to get him to come down, and he would actually carry the buckets from inside, from outside. We would have Dave or Fred, no, not Dave. Dave was up on comms, but Fred would carry these buckets up and give them to the ambassador, and he would actually carry them out for us, which was pretty cool. All right, let's see what this guy is. All right, so here's a picture of Dave and I. This is kind of pre-set up. You can see the film crew's kind of getting in there. We got cameras and sound boom sticks and all sorts of people. And this was National Geographic time, so they will be having a special come out on this as well. My guess is 2024. They were a little bit slower than Discovery Channel. Discovery Channel had a program out in like 60 days after we were done filming or so, which was incredible considering the first time it took like 2.5 years for them to get anything. So you can actually kind of see a little bit more of how deep that staircase kind of is. It's a pretty sizable drop. If you were to actually fall inside of that walled area, it would not end well. All right, so here we are. You can see Fred getting ready to go in. He's got his steel backplate all kind of rigged up with extra weight. His spare air equipment all ready to go. We're kind of doing a pre-game of what we're going to be looking for, what kind of shots that they want. You can see it's Albert Lynn, who is actually wearing the kind of cowboy hat in the front. I believe he is taking selfies of himself, which we saw a few of. All right, so here we are. We're creating a funnel for the gas out of water bottles. Like I said, just the simplest things that you think you could get or would need are extremely hard to come by. And if they are, it'll take at least a day, if not 2 to 3, for us to actually get. So most of the time we either have to top off the oil or we gotta fill it up with gas. We gotta create some sort of mechanism to do it with. And so we end up utilizing a lot of water bottles, different hoses, things like that. We have two, you can see both of them right there. We have two gas powered hookah systems. We can run 4 divers per person off of each unit. We typically would never run 4 off of 1 unit. Usually it's 2 and 2. And then we even have backup car battery ones that would be next to it. So if anything did go wrong, we could easily just switch them over to a car battery. Okay. And this is how we ingeniously decided to run the hookah line kind of systems that we run right here. And because we needed something to protect the second stages from, one, when we lower them down, just hitting the rocks or hitting the sides or getting totally muddled up or anything like that. So what we do is we run them down these aerobie flying disc toys that we actually brought from the US for this purpose. So we could stretch them across, and so it keeps the left side and the right side. So typically if you have 2 divers in, 1 guy in the front, everybody knows to stick to the left, stick to the right. So then we are able to not intertwine or tangle those up nearly as much. Like I said, it's kind of you pretty much have to adapt and overcome a lot of different obstacles, and this is kind of one of those situations. The first year we first tried this, we ended up just using paracord and tying circles and then having to deal with it that way. And this was our better option. All right, so here is this. I think this one is actually from. It's got to be the 2019 edition. Nope. This is from February. Yep. So this is, you can see Dave up there. Poor guy wearing a 5 mil wetsuit in about 100-degree weather, sun beating down on him. So you can see we're setting up the hookah lines for us. 1 generator off to the side. You can see a couple wheelbarrows as well. We actually have to utilize those because the air intake hoses get so hot. So we actually submerge them in water in those wheelbarrows so they stay colder. And so he's setting up. Dave, like I said, runs all the hookah lines for us. So he throws in 1 on each side, a third if we're going to run 3, and then he'll stage a backup one just in case somebody else has to go in. And then we will have the car batteries are on the other side of where the wheelbarrows are. So if anything happens, he can easily switch 1 unit to the next. So if anybody runs out of air or there's a malfunction, they can easily switch to that spare air, and then within about a minute, they would have another whole system that's running. There's a good shot of those, what we call the jerry cans, those buckets that I was telling you about that we fill with dirt. So that is kind of what we're utilizing right there. We actually use those to kind of swim out because it's so deep. And if you just trying to find that doorway, if you're not used to where it is, will take you 20 minutes just to find the entrance to get in this place, even though it's like a hallway. It's that bad of visibility there. Most TV film crew people, the first couple times they do it, they can't find it. A few of them refuse to do it. The first couple days they get out there, they'll dive down and then they'll come out and they'll be like, no, I'm done, not today. 2, 3 days later, they try again. Usually after the 3rd try, they'll be able to make it in, but it is quite intimidating if you're not used to it. There's some of those buckets, you can see all that kind of dirt, everything slumped in there. There's Dave's helmet on top of, that is a water pump that we had as a backup as well for a while, which in case of a collapse or something like that, we had a team that was trained. Ooh, no, what is that? Sorry, pop-up scared me. It basically is a water pump. So we had a team that was trained. They could actually pump out all of that water. Probably would take a couple hours to actually drain it completely. But that was our contingency. If something happened, if there was a cave-in or something like that, they could pump the water, which more or less might not help the situation, but it's better than it's the only alternative we really had at that point. They would have some of those workers that you saw, probably 50 of them, start just digging stuff out. All right, here's the three of us inside chamber 3 taking a selfie, because everybody knows if you don't take pictures, it didn't happen. So here we are. There's actually a bucket floating in the back there. You can see, which is where we actually keep all the stuff that we've found so far. All of the shopties, all of the gold. We find quite a bit of gold. All of that has actually been put back inside of chamber 2. So right in the middle, I used an upside down bucket filled with air to kind of create a lift bag of sorts. And then each section has a carabiner with a dry bag filled with inside water with shopties or gold or the statue or the toe. Like the toe actually got sent off for DNA, but anything that we found, we actually put back in the chamber 2. It technically belongs to the Sudanese government, but we haven't been super, how would you say, like, not trusting of the government at that point, but they tend to lose a lot of stuff, especially gold, things like that tend to just go away. So we actually put it back in there, and then, each year I've been there, we had a coup, 2 of which I was there. The last one I was 3 weeks shy of being in. And so they are still at this point, still battling it out. They fully bombed the airport, so there's no chance of us getting back in yet. So until the war kind of calms down and they stop fighting, we're going to be stuck on the sidelines and not being able to go back for probably a year, maybe 2, depending on if they get their act together on that. All right, just same picture. All right, so upcoming adventures. So instead of running this year, we're going to do, it will be the first archaeologically dive in the Dead Sea. Now it has been dived before, but never for an archaeological reason or purpose. So we will be doing that here in October. And then we're looking at potentially, there's a project in Yemen in fall of 2024. And then Sudan, as soon as we can, we will go back and continue. We've got at least another year or 2 before we decide to either dive another tomb there, because there are about 2 to 3 more that we know of that have never been excavated that are also flooded. So we could do that as well. So that is our next one. All right, that would be the end of my presentation. So I will stop the share there. And if anybody has questions or anything, let me know.
That was great, Justin. Come on off mute if you guys want to, and go ahead and ask your question. Nicole, I can tell you're about to burst, right? No? Okay.
I just say it was fascinating and thank you.
Right?
It's really, I loved it. Yeah.
Justin, I'm wondering, how did you get involved with this? Are you an undergraduate or a graduate student in underwater archaeology or any kind of schooling? Or what about Dr. Pierce Paul?
Yeah, so Dr. Pierce Paul used to be a professor of Egyptology and dendrochronology, which is the study of underwater ships and wood and stuff like that. University of Arizona, he was a professor there. So he was actually living in Scottsdale, and I was working at a dive shop in Scottsdale. And him and I were actually, we just kind of met briefly, and we talked a little bit about, he's like, I got this project where I would be going to Sudan. And prior to working for the dive industry, prior to any of my DMing or anything like that, I actually worked in the Middle East quite a bit with like a counterterrorism company. And so we did a lot of security contracts out there. So I was pretty familiar with the way, like how it runs in the North Africa type of situations. And so we talked a little bit about that. And then I mapped out like what I would do if I was to dive it. And then about a year later, he called me and was like, hey, like you're the only one who had a reasonable plan onto how we could do this. And would you want to come and do it? And I was like, yeah, like I totally would. Yeah, why not? He's like, okay, it'd have to be pretty quick. And I was like, okay, like I can swing it, I could do it. What's up? And so about within about 2 hours, I had a plane ticket to leave the next day. And so I flew out to Africa and I spent about 3 months out there the first year with him. And we were the first people in the world to ever dive a tomb, which was kind of cool. Uh, and we just went from there. Once I did the first year with him, he came back and said, hey, like I got all these other projects and stuff, but I'm gonna lead you, let you lead those dive teams. So you pick the people, you vet them, you dive with them. I'll let you know gear budgets and how many divers we can do, and we'll continue this on. So that's where we're at this point.
So prior to all this, have you ever done anything like this in terms of underwater archaeology?
Underwater archaeology, I have not, to be honest. I hadn't. I mean, I've taken an archaeology, took 2 archaeology classes back at ASU. I got a degree out in archaeology, and that was my first concern with them. And I was like, hey, like I'm gonna break everything, bro. Like don't let me touch valuable stuff. And but he told me, he's like, listen, right now it's way easier for me to teach you some fundamentals of archaeology just to get the stuff out, and then we have a team to handle it, than it is for you to teach the archaeologists over here how to dive in zero viz and not like lose their mind. So fair enough, right? So and we started that, and we've learned over the course of a couple of years. I've gone out to, he actually runs a company called the American Center of Research in Amman, Jordan. So he runs a program out there. And so I've gone and spent about 9 months in 2021 out there during COVID, made some time useful for me. And I went out there and we kind of went over archaeology a little bit, and like really kind of how to preserve, or how to like best way to get stuff out. Now, in an underwater setting, it's a lot more different than using a paintbrush and a small little trowel or a little shovel. So it's still a work in progress for me. I'm not great at it, but I mean, I'm willing to dive it. So that would.
What other questions do people have? Please come off mute. Go ahead, Vaughn.
With the silt and moving the debris out of the caverns and out of the tombs, have you ever thought of like using a vacuum system of some sort and then pulling it out of the tomb and vacuuming it out? I mean,
Yeah,
I understand that you said getting equipment in and out is a resource problem, and using the boomerangs or something like that as a loop device would make absolute sense. So, I mean, since you've been back 3 times, you said, right now?
Correct.
Yeah,
I've been back 3 times.
And so like you continue to excavate, but it's all handwork of pretty much digging and filtering through your fingers?
And the problem, we played around with the idea of getting a vacuum system that would have been like amazing, but it would have only worked for like the first few layers, because there's such a fine layer of silt, and then it gets down to a real deep like clay, and you have to like get in there to get it. And I don't think the vacuum system would be able to do it. And I mean, we didn't think it would be fragile enough, or
It's not
enough
like
to.
beach sand or anything like you're going to vacuum up on a wreck or something like that. It's much more fine
Right.
grained. Is
It's
that mainly due to the roof collapse from the ceiling of the tomb, of that falling down, or is it just natural sediment that's come up from the floor?
we think the clay level is a natural sediment of that region, of that floor of where they dug. But the fine layer of silt that it's probably like this much, and it's weird. It's like a jelly. You just stick your hand in, and we think that is from the roof collapse and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, oh, it's weird, and it just gets everywhere. You know, it's regulators and
Nice,
swivels.
thanks.
It's nuts.
Sounds
But
like
I would love,
negatively ionic clay, which will suspend and stay up forever and gets in
yeah,
everything. And
yeah.
tends to stick to things electronically, which is, do you get patina on stuff from it? Like, does it tarnish or stain things?
Some
Does
stuff
the
it
clay stain
does.
things?
Yeah, like if you have any like stainless steel or something and you don't
Yeah,
clean it really
it's
well,
negatively ionic clay, which does show up in cave systems too. It's nasty stuff. Is the
yeah.
water table that shallow, or is there something weird going on with nearby waterways? Or
So typically they dam up. The more they dam up the Nile, the higher the groundwater nearby rises, and that's what we've seen. So we went from like 1 year of having 12-foot max depth to the next year of having like 20-foot max depth, and
so
they slowly keep rising it up.
so if they have a severe drought and it goes down, that will help you then.
It could help us in terms of that. Now we're also afraid, just like we have, like you have a swimming pool and you fill it with a bunch of water and you let it be decrepit for years. If you take the water out, the water pressure is kind of holding it in a way. So if it does go, if they completely drain it and it does get a lot of air, the ceiling could collapse even
Oh, it
more.
probably will. Yeah.
I'm
So,
sorry, I
go ahead.
may have missed this, but did you say that you had some sort of a communication device where you can talk underwater with the people on the surface?
Correct. We did for the last year. The first 2 years we didn't. The last year we did have an OTS comm system that we ran. Uh, we actually did a hard line because if you used the wireless version of it, there was too
Buddy
much silt in the
phone.
water. You couldn't. It just didn't work. So we had to use a wired one, which you'll see if you watch like Expeditions Unknown, you'll see we have that, and it'll be wired. It's taped to our hookah system, and so we had a surface comm unit to Dave, and then 2 to 3 divers had comms. One person didn't, which that guy just sat there in the dark and waited for people to come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just interested in the psychology of it, because it looks terrifying, right? When you showed those pictures of the colors, right, and you can't see anything. So how do people keep themselves calm and logical in those situations? Like, do you ever have those moments where you just kind of feel this rising sense of and then what do you do to calm yourself down?
Like the first year we did it, I definitely did. One, because I was so excited to do it, right? We finally punched through, right? We got the door, and you actually have to like punch out and then swim through this tiny little opening. And that's when the first time I realized I was like, well, like I've done cave dive, I've done something like that similar, but somebody's always dived it before me. Like no one's been in this. I don't know if it's gonna just drop down. I don't know if I'll hit a wall. I don't know what I'm gonna do. So that's when I definitely was probably the only time I freak out a little bit more. But I was so excited to do it, I just kind of had to push myself into doing it. Now that's why my dive, like the guys that I take or the guys that are on the team now, I have dived with hundreds of dives, and typically we make them do. That's the nice thing, right? Lake Pleasant that we have in Phoenix is really bad visibility in the summer.
Yeah.
So if we can do 50 dives together in Lake Pleasant and they can handle it and they're not, they teaching it all the time, they're not going to be the guys to freak out. But I can't determine. I don't know who NatGeo sends or Discovery Channel sends. So those guys, they tend to be a little bit more on the wigged out side. Like I said, the first time, one guy didn't even do it for like 3 days. And I ended up having to, he had to, I would walk into the water, and then he would lay down and grab my ankles, and I would just have to army crawl us into the second chamber for him to like do it. He just would not be even comfortable trying to feel himself around. He just held on. And I mean, I'm a pretty small dude, and this guy was like 6'7" and like 300 pounds. So it was not a fun day for me, but we got it done. But no, definitely people do freak out, and uh, there's not much you can do about it. You know, that's why when we do it, I have to make sure that they're competent in doing it and comfortable, because there's not room for error. Because if I've told people before, like if they freak out, if I had to, I would choke them out and stuff them through the exit, because they're going to be a liability to the rest of the team, and I just wouldn't have it. But it's not for everybody. The first day it's beautiful. Second days it's not. But
It's generally
So-
familiarity and training. That it's habituation. Really, it's just like anything else. You get used to it, and your mindset adapts to it, and you got to keep from getting complacent and watch human factors for sure, because it's easy to make poor decisions once you've got away with things that you get away with.
mm-hmm.
So is it impossible to pump all the water out?
It's not impossible, right? The pump system that we had would have been far capable of doing it. It'd take a couple hours, and they'd be able to pump it all out. But that would open it up to where the ceilings would be a little bit more fragile, and they could probably collapse. Chamber 3, on the last time we were there, did have a little bit more collapse between the 2 years or whatever it had been since we'd been into it. There was a little bit more debris. So we were a little bit more nervous on that. So we didn't do as much on this one specific side of chamber 3. But we knew if we pumped it out, it would probably collapse. And then whatever else is in there is just going to be lost anyway.
Wow. So what's the contingency plan if it collapses while you're in there?
Pump out the water and start digging. We'd have the workers on site. That is a contingency if it's a collapse. It depends on where the collapse is. Mostly it
Right.
probably wouldn't be like a full collapse. It'd probably just be a partial. Just make sure everybody would get out. And then like the front door, right, is not going to collapse. We built a giant steel structure for that, and that hasn't collapsed in 2,000 years. It's not going to now. Now,
Okay.
chamber 3 or something like that, you could have a little bit of rock fall. Now, as long as no one gets pinned, it'd be pretty hard to have a full collapse of some sort. But if it did,
Oh, well,
it did. Like, there's
Yeah.
not much we could do about it.
right. It would be too hard to reinforce something like that or excavate something.
Yeah, now if we were going to be in it like for the long haul, like if we were going to do this for the next 15 years, we could, in a sense, maybe bring in some structural beams and actually do something more to it. But we didn't even originally think we'd do another year, but we're thinking we'll do another year and that'd be it. You know, by a year, we mean like a week and a half of actually diving it, 2 weeks maybe. But we could stay, but getting that steel in there, getting it set up, I think would cause more issue than putting it up. Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know if I missed this. So is this related to like the same pharaohs and everything from Egypt too? It's all connected?
Uh, they're very, very similar. Now there were a few pharaohs at Nuri that ruled over Egypt at that time, and then there was a few that were under the rule of Egypt as well in that time frame that's over there. Very similar, but very distinctive. Like Sudan always had its own pharaoh dynasty type of thing, and Egypt did as well. And they did a lot of trade, but they also did feuding. And at one point, somebody owned the other guy, and then the other guy owned that guy. So it was not the same, but very, very similar. You know, like in a way, like back in the like France and England back in the day, right? Like very different countries, but at one point they're always kind of battling each other or trading with each other, but not the same, but different. But does that make sense?
Yeah. I
Would
need
this
to.
be considered the Upper Kingdom?
Yes.
Um, there was something else I was gonna ask. Now I'm trying to remember. Sorry, never mind.
That's all right.
Does anyone else have any questions? All good.
Lastly, like when you said it was so hot, like watching you guys in those wetsuits, like what was the temperature? I don't know if you said that outside.
The temperature, it's true desert, right? It's literally in the Sahara Desert. So at night you're at 45 degrees. Early in the morning when we get there at 6, it's 50s. But then by like 9 or 10, it's 80, and then by noon it's 100. So typically around 90 degrees to 95 is like the high. It can get up to 100. Uh, and so whoever's stuck in a wetsuit outside is just miserable. But they could at least get wet and it'd be better. We do have shade. The other archaeologists on site, they don't have shade and they just have to work out in the beating sun. But we at least get some shade to change into, and yeah, and that's in dead of winter. You know, that's January, February. It's typically when we're going to be there, and it's just hot.
Wow.
Yeah, I lived in Egypt, so I know it's like an oven in the summer.
Yeah,
So I was
yeah.
like, oh my God. Oh, I didn't know it was January when you did that. So okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
so
We did. They did one season in the summer, and then they were like, no, they didn't even. We weren't even diving at that point, but they were just excavating to find the doorway, like just to find the stairs and everything. And they said they did it in the summer, and it was, you know, 90 at night and 110 during the day. And
we
they
used to
just couldn't
change
do it.
like 3 times a day, I remember.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
There is a question on the chat. Is there any
Mhm.
underwater map navigation tool used for tracking the path?
Yeah, I saw that. There isn't any that we have. I mean, one you, you wouldn't be able to see it even if you had something. Like you barely can read like a dive watch or a dive computer. It's hardly even recognizable under the water. Uh, we have done some stuff above the ground to kind of map it, so we knew how far in, like guessing wise. And we did bring in last time we were there, we had ground penetrating radar to see if there was anything else and stuff to explore around us, but nothing really underwater for navigation besides a cave line and cave arrows.
Are there many more pyramids that are flooded?
We know there's at least 4 that are completely flooded, that 3 of which have not been excavated. This is one that has been now. The other ones on site, depending on how deep they go, they very well could be. There is one that is not, which is weird, and then there's one next door that is. So they don't really know until they dig out, and digging out takes probably 2 months, which is time just to dig 80 feet down and that 100 foot of length. So we don't know until we do it, but they do know there's at least 3 more that we haven't done that are flooded.
So I'm wondering if there's more to your experience around the coup. And I know you can't get in because the airport's bombed and stuff, and you have local people with security that is provided for your stuff. Have you had any other concerns in relation to your own personal safety or?
Personal safety wise, we've never had much of an issue, mainly because one that in that general area, their issue was not with America or American ideals or Western issues. It's more internal politics. So they don't really focus too much on us. So we don't feel unsafe in that realm. But the last time is now they're just indiscriminately just shelling each other and bombing stuff. So there is a chance for that. So much that all of our friends, all the embassy, everyone, U.S. personnel got evacuated. Like I said, about 3.5 weeks after we left, they all got evacuated. 2 different SEAL teams came in and helicoptered them out in the middle of the night. So going back, we probably safety-wise won't do it until there's at least a stabilized ceasefire and it's actually lasted. Now, before we were there, it was rough, but it was never like dangerous to us. It's not like going to Baghdad or something like that where they're targeting Americans. There they weren't. They wanted America. They wanted Western infrastructure. I mean, the first year I was there wasn't even a single ATM in the country, right? There's no foreign investment allowed because they were on a terrorist watch list. So there was absolutely like banking. It was all cash, no credit card machines, no ATMs, no fast food chains. It was just sheer cash that you had to come in with. And if you didn't bring enough, well, go to work, make some money because you're not going to be able to withdraw it from anywhere.
Wow. There's another question that's come in from our difference in temperature in ground level water and underwater. Summertime.
Yeah, it was the water temperature. It's kind of like geothermal heated, kind of. So if you went further back, the deeper you went into the tomb, the warmer the water was. Now, when the outside water temperature, outside temperature is 45 degrees at night, that water temperature doesn't heat up that much during the day because it's still in a canyon, so it doesn't get much sunlight. So it's 60s on the outside, and then the further in you get, it gets warmer, and that silty layer definitely holds more warmth. So if you're above it, it's 65, 70 towards the outside area. You go down, it gets a little warmer. Chamber 3, the first year we went, was actually like, it was crazy. It got like 90 degrees inside. And but then once we actually mixed the water kind of all together by kicking it around and doing stuff, it evened out a little bit more, but definitely still warmer. So if you had to start digging, you wanted to be the guy in chamber 3 because that was the warm part. Otherwise, chamber 1 guy, you're sitting there in 60-degree water just waiting, not moving for 10 minutes at a time.
Yikes.
And then winter.
Well, just completely fascinating. I just can't thank you enough. Any other questions before we wrap? Cool. So you guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Justin. Really amazing presentation.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah. I guess I should stop the recording. Where's the button? Maybe it stopped. There it goes. Sorry. Hold on one sec.